Why was she always the one they overlooked, the quiet one, the woman who lingered at the edge of the range, never asking for attention, never needing approval? They ignored her at the briefing table. They mocked her when she stayed silent. And when the question rang out, "Any snipers here?" they expected nothing from her. What came next, none of them were ready for. The Hindu Kush mountains held their breath that morning, thin air carrying the metallic scent of blood and cordite. Delta Force was trapped in a valley, pinned down, running out of ammunition. 6 men who'd faced death before, now convinced they'd reached their final hour. Their comms specialist was already gone. Their captain was bleeding out. The enemy's rifles echoed across the stone. The math of survival was simple and against them. Until a single shot split the chaos. One man fell, then another. Each bullet struck as if guided by something beyond human calculation. No one could see where it came from. No one could explain how, at impossible distances in crosswinds that bent lesser shooters' bullets astray, the rounds landed with surgical precision. The ambush broke apart. The Delta boys lived, and the ghost in the mountains vanished. That story was never filed in official reports. It survived only in whispers. In a Legion hall far from Afghanistan, an old colonel told it over whiskey, calling their savior Ghost Hawk. But he didn't know her name. He didn't know her scars. He didn't know the weight she carried. Morgan Reeves woke 3 states away, body rigid, drenched in sweat, her hand already clutching the knife by her bed before she even opened her eyes. It was just another night, just another dream she couldn't outrun. She sat in silence, staring at the pale gold light creeping across the Montana ranch house. 35 years old, 3 years since she'd left the field. Yet the war hadn't left her. It clung to her chest like frost, heavy, unyielding. She moved with discipline, jeans, boots, a flannel shirt, but there was no hiding the shadows in her eyes. Her grandmother heard her footsteps in the kitchen and asked, as she always did, "Nightmares again?" Morgan never gave details. "Just the usual," she'd reply, pouring coffee into the battered thermos she carried like a shield. The old woman would nod, respecting the silence between them, knowing love alone could not cross that gulf. Outside, the land stretched wide and untamed. 1,000 acres of grass and mountain ridges. A place where time slowed, where no one asked questions, where Morgan tried to bury the past with the rhythm of work. Fix a fence line, patch the roof, cut the wood, anything to quiet the noise in her head. But even here, the habits of war never faded. Every sound caught her attention. Every shift of wind or movement on the horizon registered in her pulse. The rifle in her truck wasn't just for mountain lions. It was the only thing she trusted. The Macmillan TAC 338, her old companion, her gift, her curse. A weapon that felt like an extension of her own bones. Tuesday came like it always did. Range day. The place she went to breathe. The place she went to silence the memories. Mountain Ridge shooting range stretched along a valley carved by time. For locals, it was just a business. For veterans, it was sanctuary. And for Morgan, it was confession. She set up at the farthest lane, alone as always. No chatter, no need for recognition, just the slow ritual of preparation. She closed her eyes, felt her heartbeat settle, dry-fired the bolt, checked the weld of cheek to stock, breathed in, held, breathed out. The first round cracked across the range, shattering the silence. At 500 meters, the target's head zone split open exactly where she had aimed. No hesitation. No wasted motion. Each shot that followed carried the same cold finality. She didn't shoot to impress. She shot to remember who she was, and to forget. Others noticed. They always did, even if she never acknowledged it. That afternoon, a group of contractors occupied the center lanes, loud, confident, boasting backgrounds in Navy SEAL teams and private security. Men used to being noticed. Their leader, Ethan Blackwood, carried himself with authority and arrogance in equal measure. His men missed their shots at 1,000 meters, swore at the wind, cursed their luck. 12 misses in a row. That was when the old colonel stepped forward, mischief glinting in his weathered eyes. "Any snipers here?" he called out, voice cutting through the embarrassment. Laughter followed, awkward, defensive. They all looked at each other, none willing to answer. And then his gaze found her. Morgan Reeves standing by her truck, ready to disappear into silence again. She didn't want the attention, didn't need their approval, but something in the colonel's look, sharp, knowing, patient, made her pause. "What do you say, Ms. Reeves?" he asked, his tone half challenge, half respect. "Care to show these gentlemen what precision really looks like?" Every head turned, every conversation died. She stood still, every instinct telling her to walk away, to vanish, to stay hidden. But after a long breath, she opened the truck, lifted the case, and walked back to the line. "What distance?" Her voice was quiet, but it cut the air like steel. The colonel's smile widened. 2,000. The men scoffed. The winds howled down the valley, unpredictable, savage. Even Blackwood shook his head. "That's impossible," he muttered. Morgan didn't answer. She laid down, adjusted her bipod, and began the patient ritual of calculation. Wind, temperature, air density, elevation. A bullet that would drop nearly 30 feet before it touched steel. A flight time of 3 seconds that would feel like eternity. And still, her breathing slowed, her body aligned, her finger pressed the trigger. The rifle roared. The world held its breath. 1 heartbeat, 2, 3. "Hit," the colonel whispered, his voice betraying the awe he tried to contain. "Dead center." Shock rippled through the line. Blackwood stared through the spotting scope, his disbelief raw. His men shuffled, unsure whether to be impressed or humiliated. Morgan said nothing. She simply worked the bolt. Again. 3,000, the colonel said. No one laughed now. They only watched as she repeated the process, each calculation more impossible than the last. 10 minutes passed in silence until she fired again. 4 seconds later, steel rang. A second impossible hit. The range fell into stunned quiet. She dismantled her rifle, packed it away, and turned to leave. No victory speech. No need for glory, just silence. But the colonel stopped her. His voice softened, his eyes narrowing with something more than curiosity. "That wasn't just skill," he said quietly. "That was something else, something I've seen only once before. You remind me of a man from Berlin, 1989. Eagle Eye, they called him. Best shot I ever knew." Morgan froze. For the first time her mask slipped, just for a heartbeat. The colonel saw it, and he knew. "You're not just a rancher," he said. "You're his blood." She said nothing, but the ghost she had been running from stirred awake, and what she didn't say spoke louder than anything she could have admitted. What was she hiding? That was the question hanging in the colonel's office after the range went silent. Morgan Reeves sat across from James Harrison, the retired Special Forces officer who ran the shooting range. His eyes were sharp, cutting past her silence, weighing every flicker of expression. He'd seen shooters before, but not like her. "That wasn't training," he said finally. "Not standard military, not even Tier 1. That was something else. Where does a civilian learn to read the wind like that, to make a shot at 3,000 meters? Morgan kept her face blank. Years of conditioning held her steady. "I've had practice." Harrison leaned back, studying her. His hands rested on the desk, weathered steady. "Eagle Eye Thompson," he said softly. "Berlin, 1989. He saved my life once with a shot people still call impossible. And you," his voice dropped, "you have his eyes." The name hit like a blow she didn't want to show. She forced herself to breathe evenly, but something inside cracked. He had spoken her grandfather's name aloud, a name most of the world had never known. "I should go," she muttered, standing, but Harrison wasn't finished. "Ghost Hawk," he said, low and certain. "That was you, Hindu Kush. You saved Delta Force that day." Her hand froze on the doorknob. She didn't turn, she didn't answer. Silence was safer, but silence was an answer in itself. "I won't put it in reports," Harrison said, "but you need to know someone's been asking questions. Russian, ex-KGB. Name, Viktor Volkov. He's sniffing around Eagle's Ridge. Asked about female shooters with military backgrounds. Morgan's pulse ticked upward. She masked it, but Harrison caught the shift. He always caught the smallest tells. Volkov. The name scraped against old memories, against fragments of classified briefings and whispers in the Nightshade program. She kept her voice neutral. Why would an ex-KGB care about me? Because he doesn't let go, Harrison said grimly. And because you remind me of a ghost I thought I left in Berlin. Morgan left without answering, but her mind was already spinning. If Volkov was here, her cover was compromised. The drive back to the ranch was long, shadowed by the setting sun. Ruth was waiting on the porch, rocking in her chair, eyes sharper than her age suggested. She always knew. "Eventful day?" her grandmother asked. Morgan tried to deflect, but Ruth pressed. When Morgan mentioned Volkov's name, Ruth's rocking paused. A subtle tell, but enough. "You know him." Ruth's voice was steady, but her hands tightened on the armrest. "He approached me, offered to buy this ranch, twice its value. I turned him down." "Grandma, why didn't you tell me?" "Because it didn't seem important then, but now," her eyes hardened. "Now I see he's after more than land." Morgan stared at her, realization dawning. Secrets she'd buried under discipline, and silence began to stir. Ruth knew more. About William Thompson, about Berlin, about the shadows Morgan had inherited. That night Ruth led her to the basement, to a trunk hidden behind the gun safe. Dust covered it, untouched for decades. She unlocked it with a key she'd worn on a chain around her neck all these years. Inside were not family keepsakes, not photographs, but journals, operational logs, weapons components, the true legacy of William Thompson. "Your grandfather was never just a soldier," Ruth said quietly. "He worked in places that didn't exist, for agencies that never admitted his name, and before his last mission he left this with me." Morgan lifted one of the leather-bound journals. The handwriting was precise, the records detailed. Operations in East Germany, assassinations, code names, a hidden history of the Cold War. And then at the bottom, a metal case, heavy, locked with a mechanism she recognized instantly, the same pattern engraved on her rifle's custom grip. "What's inside?" she asked. "Something he called his legacy," Ruth said. "He made me swear never to open it unless his bloodline was threatened. Maybe that time has come." Morgan ran her fingers across the case, feeling the ridges that matched her weapon. In her chest, dread mixed with something sharper, a pull she couldn't name. Her phone vibrated, an unknown number. The message was short, cold, final. "Project Nightshade COMPROMICD. Remaining ASSETS ELIMINATED. VOLKOV has CIA support. Trust no one. Meet Harrison AT Mountain Ridge, 600. Come armed." The transformation was instant. The rancher vanished. The operative returned. She grabbed her go-bag, cash, weapons, false IDs, gear she hadn't touched in 3 years. Ruth watched with old eyes, grief and pride mingling. "William thought running would protect us. It didn't. Don't make the same mistake." Morgan checked the case again, checked the rifle, checked her resolve. Tomorrow at dawn she would have to choose: hide, run, or face the shadows that had been chasing her all her life. And for the first time in years she felt it, the weight of legacy. The impossible shots weren't just skill, they were blood, they were inheritance. The night grew darker outside. Somewhere on the ridgeline, a man with cold Siberian eyes lowered his scope. Volkov had been waiting 3 decades for this moment, and the granddaughter of Eagle Eye had finally stepped into the open. Why was the door unlocked? That was the first warning. Mountain Ridge shooting range looked deserted in the pale light of dawn. Morgan Reeves killed her truck's engine, leaving the keys ready for a quick escape. The Macmillan TAC 338 rested across her lap, bolt closed on a live round. A duffel bag full of weapons and gear lay in the back. untouched since the day she swore she'd left this life behind. The text message still echoed in her mind. Nightshade compromised, assets eliminated. The ghosts of names came back: Diaz, Chen, Williams, people she had trained with, bled with, trusted. Gone. She hadn't even known until now. Her boots crunched softly against the gravel as she approached the dark building. Every instinct screamed caution. Harrison's truck was parked by the office. A single light glowed faintly inside, but the door unlocked. She pushed it open with the barrel of her rifle, every sense alive, body shifting seamlessly into combat stance. This was Morgan the rancher anymore. This was Ghost Hawk, the woman the world never admitted existed. "Colonel," her voice was low, controlled. "In here," came Harrison's reply, but there was something in his tone, tight, strained, not right. She moved through the empty hall, past trophies on the wall, old photographs of soldiers long gone. The back office door stood slightly ajar, spilling a knife-thin line of light across the floor. Morgan nudged it open. Harrison sat at his desk, posture stiff. Two men flanked him. One held a pistol, lazily aimed at the old colonel's head. The other leaned against the wall, a suit too polished for Montana, confidence radiating from every gesture. "Ms. Reeves," the suited man said smoothly. "Right on time, just as the colonel promised." "Drop the weapon," Harrison urged quickly, his eyes sending a second message. "Don't trust them, don't play their game." Morgan kept her rifle steady, reading the room. The gunman, mid-40s, fit, professional, no wasted movement. Dangerous. The suit, older, sharp-eyed, practiced in manipulation. Both trained, both ready. "I don't know either of these men," she said flatly. "Calvin Michaels," the suit said, flashing a badge. "CIA counterintelligence. My associate, Agent Wilson. Apologies for the theater, but we needed to ensure the colonel didn't discourage you from coming." "And why would he?" Morgan asked, eyes narrowing. "Because," Michaels said, voice measured, "we need to talk about Project Nightshade, and why someone is eliminating what's left of it." Her body went cold, but she didn't blink. She had practiced this for years: never show the reaction, never give them the advantage. "I don't know what you're talking about." Michaels sighed as though disappointed but unsurprised. "Morgan Reeves, born Amanda Morgan Thompson, Army Special Operations 2010, recruited into a classified program in 2012, 14 deployments, long-range precision operations, presumed killed in Syria 2019. His gaze sharpened. "Sound familiar?" The air thickened. Harrison's eyes flicked to hers, grim. They knew everything, or enough to be dangerous. Wilson lowered his pistol at Michael's command, but not far. Michael smiled faintly. "You don't have to play coy, Ms. Reeves. Not here, not now. The question isn't whether you exist, it's whether you survive." Morgan's grip tightened around her rifle, but her voice stayed calm. "What do you want?" "Protection," Michael said smoothly. "From Volkov. He's been hunting Nightshade operatives. 3 are already dead, you're next." "And what does the agency get in return?" she asked. "Cooperation," Michaels replied. "You know what he's after, something called Prometheus. He thinks you can lead him to it. We can't allow that, neither can you." The name landed like a stone in her chest. Prometheus. She'd seen fragments of it in the journals the night before. Soviet research, her grandfather's final mission, and something more. "Prometheus," she repeated slowly. "What is it?" Michael's eyes flicked briefly to Harrison before he answered. "A weapon project. The Soviets were working on a new class of tactical nuclear device. Small, clean, virtually undetectable. When the Berlin Wall fell, all records disappeared." Harrison cut in. "It didn't just disappear, it was taken by Eagle Eye." His voice hardened. "By William Thompson." The room froze. The truth hung heavy between them. "Your grandfather," Michaels confirmed. "He stole Prometheus. He delivered some of it to Langley, but not all. We believe he kept key components hidden. Insurance." "Insurance, the journals, the case." The patterns etched into her rifle grip, it all connected. "And why hunt Nightshade operatives?" Morgan demanded. Michaels hesitated. Wilson watched her closely, eyes sharp. Finally, Michaels spoke. Because Nightshade wasn't just training, it was built on research taken from Prometheus. Enhancement protocols, human augmentation. What the Soviets started, we finished. The words hit her like a physical blow. The injections, the neural conditioning, the things that had set her apart, not training, not just discipline, but science stolen from a Soviet nightmare. She hid the shake in her hands, kept her voice even. "So we were experiments." "Assets," Michaels corrected coldly. "The best of your generation. Volkov knows this. He believes one of you holds the missing pieces to his puzzle." "And you," Morgan asked, "what do you want with me?" "Both," Michaels admitted. "To protect you, and to find Prometheus before he does." Harrison's jaw tightened. He didn't like the answer any more than she did. Morgan considered the pieces. If Volkov was truly hunting Nightshade, Ruth was in danger. So was anyone connected to her. But if the CIA was lying, and they always lied, she might be walking into another trap. "I'll work with you," she said finally. "On my terms, my grandmother stays safe. I don't leave Eagle's Ridge." Michael smiled thinly, agreed. But she didn't trust him, not for a second. What none of them saw was the black device hidden in the vent above their heads. Every word transmitted miles away. Where Viktor Volkov sat in his makeshift command center, listening, smiling. The CIA thought they had her. But in truth, they had walked exactly where he wanted them to go. And outside, in the Montana wilderness, the trap he had been setting for 3 decades was about to spring shut. Why were strangers asking about her, in a town that had always minded its own? That was the question circling Morgan's mind as night fell over Eagle's Ridge. She had heard it from Ruth first, then from Michael the ranch hand, then from a neighbor in town. Unfamiliar men, Eastern European accents, moving through diners and gas stations, asking about veterans, asking about her. Volkov wasn't hiding anymore. He was probing, testing the edges of her life. Morgan sat at the kitchen table, hands moving with quiet precision as she cleaned her sidearm. The smell of gun oil mingled with the faint aroma of Ruth's coffee. Each part clicked back into place, familiar, ritualistic. Weapons maintenance wasn't just habit, it was meditation. Ruth watched her from across the table. "You're not telling me everything," she said softly. Morgan didn't look up. "No. You're carrying yourself different, like you did when you first came home, like you're waiting for a fight." Morgan hesitated, then set the pistol down. "Because the fight's already here." She told her grandmother about Harrison, about the CIA men, about the name Prometheus. Ruth listened in silence, but when Morgan mentioned Nightshade, her grandmother's eyes flickered. Recognition. Pain. "William knew," Ruth whispered. "He said they would use his bloodline, said one day they'd come for what ran in his veins." She reached for Morgan's hand, her old fingers warm, steady. "You can't run from this." Neither could he. Morgan felt the weight of those words. Legacy was no longer abstract. It was here, in her blood, in the case locked beneath the floorboards, in the crosshairs of men who wanted her dead. By 9 that night, she was slipping out the back of the ranch house, dirt bike engine low, weaving through mountain trails to avoid surveillance. The hardware store sat at the edge of town, lights dimmed, windows dark. Only those who knew saw the quiet signal above the back door, one lantern swinging. Inside, the room filled slowly. One by one, veterans entered. Rangers, Marines, Special Forces. Men and women older now, some limping, some scarred, but all carrying the weight of service. They had fought in wars scattered across decades and continents, and they all knew when danger had come home. Carl Fisher, the store's owner, closed the door behind the last arrival and swept the room with practiced caution. No phones, no chatter. This was not poker night. This was survival. Morgan stood at the center, feeling their eyes on her. She wasn't used to being the one who spoke. She had lived her life in shadows, silent and unseen, but tonight she couldn't afford silence. "Thank you for coming," she began, voice calm, deliberate. "What I'm about to say puts you all at risk, but the truth already found its way into town. You've seen the strangers, you've felt it, something happening here, and we can't ignore it." Fran Torres, the athletic director who had once served 3 tours in special forces, leaned forward. "Carl says Russians. Is that true?" Morgan nodded. "Viktor Volkov, former KGB. He's here under cover of a development project, but it's just that, a cover. He's brought operators with him, trained, armed. They're looking for something that doesn't belong to them." "Something," Sarah Parker said carefully. She had been an intel officer once before running the local paper. Her sharp eyes didn't miss much. Or someone. Morgan met her gaze. For a moment she considered lying. But these people deserved the truth, or as much of it as she could give. "Both," she admitted. "My grandfather was CIA, codename Eagle Eye. In Berlin, 1989, he stole something from the Soviets, a program, a weapons project. They called it Prometheus. Volkov was the man who lost it. He's here to finish what he started." The room fell heavy with silence. The veterans processed the revelation, old instincts waking in them. "What does he want from you?" Torres asked finally. Morgan's voice stayed steady, though her stomach nodded. "He thinks I know where it is. He thinks I'm the key to finding it, and he's not wrong." The air shifted. Some faces showed suspicion, others respect, but none disbelief. They had seen enough in their lives to know when someone was speaking truth. Carl broke the silence. "So what's the play? We sit and wait for his men to knock on our doors." "No," Morgan said. "We prepare, we protect each other, and we do it without drawing attention. Volkov is watching, so is the CIA. If they think we're organizing, they'll shut it down before it starts." Sarah's jaw tightened. "You trust the agency less than the Russians?" "I trust neither," Morgan said simply. "But Volkov doesn't care about laws. The CIA pretends it does. That makes one of them predictable." A murmur of agreement moved through the room. Soldiers understood that logic. Sometimes survival was about knowing which enemy lied more consistently. Morgan laid out what little she could. Surveillance on the ridge, break-ins at local businesses, questions asked at the diner. The veterans added their own observations: strangers seen near the motel, vehicles parked too long on quiet roads, men in suits flashing badges that didn't ring true. It wasn't paranoia, it was pattern recognition, and the pattern was tightening around Eagle's Ridge. When the meeting ended, they slipped out in ones and twos, vanishing into the Montana night. But the quiet resolve in their eyes told Morgan she was no longer alone. They would stand with her when the time came. Back at the ranch, Ruth waited awake. She didn't ask what had been said. She didn't need to. She saw the weight on her granddaughter's shoulders and knew it was the same weight William once carried. Morgan sat by the window, rifle across her lap, eyes scanning the ridgeline. Somewhere out there, Volkov's men were watching. Somewhere out there, a storm was gathering. And for the first time, she wondered if survival meant more than just staying alive. Maybe it meant deciding who you stood for when the shadows finally closed in. The Montana night pressed silent and endless against the glass. But in that silence, Morgan felt it, the past converging with the present, the choices of her grandfather bleeding into her own. This wasn't just about her. It never had been. And tomorrow, when Volkov made his next move, Eagle's Ridge would learn just how far the legacy of one quiet woman could reach. Why was the dog barking at nothing? That was the first sign something was wrong. The Reeves ranch had always been quiet after sundown. Coyotes howled from the ridgeline, owls hunted in the dark, but the dogs never barked without reason. Tonight, they wouldn't stop. Morgan Reeves stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand, scanning the tree line. The dogs growled low, ears pricked, eyes fixed on the western slope. The night air carried no sound of vehicles, no movement she could catch, but she trusted the animals more than her own nerves. Someone was out there. Inside, Ruth watched her granddaughter with worry etched across her face. "You can't keep this from touching us forever," she said quietly. "I know," Morgan replied, eyes never leaving the darkness, "but I can keep it from reaching you." She didn't sleep that night. She sat by the window, rifle across her knees, heart steady in the rhythm of waiting. Her mind drifted back, unwilling, to the only other time she'd felt this exact pressure, the sense of being hunted by an enemy who never tired. Syria, 2018. The mission where everything went wrong. The mission where Nightshade began to unravel. She remembered the rooftop in Aleppo, the broken skyline glowing under artillery fire, her spotter Diaz whispering wind corrections, then the sudden silence when the comms cut, then the scream when Chen went down, the blood on the concrete, and Volkov's men, shadows moving through the smoke, relentless, precise. They had been testing her even then, hunting her unit to study how she fought. And she had survived, alone. That was the day the name Ghost Hawk was whispered for the first time, not in admiration, in fear. A memory she carried like a scar. By dawn, the dogs quieted. Whoever had been out there was gone, but she knew they would be back. That morning, town felt different. Gas station attendants kept their eyes down. The diner's usual chatter was muted. Strangers sat at booths pretending to be travelers, but their posture gave them away, backs too straight, eyes too restless. Surveillance teams poorly disguised. Morgan slipped into the hardware store, where Carl Fisher greeted her with a look that told her he'd seen the same thing. 3 SUVs on Main Street, he murmured. Rotating shifts, not locals. "They're getting bolder," she said. "They're trying to show you they're everywhere," Carl replied. "Trying to make you crack." Morgan didn't answer. She couldn't afford to. Later that day, she met Harrison again in the range office. He looked tired, older than he had 2 days ago. The CIA men were gone for now, but the weight of their presence lingered. "You stirred a hornet's nest," he told her. "Volkov was already here," she said. "I just made him show his hand." Harrison studied her. "And the agency, you think they'll protect you?" Morgan shook her head. "They don't protect assets, they use them." Harrison gave a humorless chuckle. "You sound like your grandfather." She hesitated. "You knew him better than you said, didn't you?" Harrison's silence was answer enough. Finally, he spoke. "Berlin, 89. He saved me from Volkov once, and he warned me, said the Russians don't forgive. They wait. They outlive your children, your grandchildren if they have to. That's what Volkov's doing now." Morgan looked away, throat tight. She had spent her life trying not to be defined by William Thompson, but here she was, hunted for his choices, living in his shadow. That night the veterans met again, this time in Tor's barn. The air smelled of hay and old oil. Maps lay spread across a workbench, marked with red circles where strangers had been spotted. "This isn't random," Sarah Parker said, tapping the map. "They're building a net, tightening it around the ranch." Torres frowned. "They want her alive, otherwise they'd have moved already." "Alive for what?" Carl asked. Everyone turned to Morgan. Her voice was steady, though her stomach nodded. "Because I'm the only one who can open what they're looking for." They stared, waiting. She explained what she could, the journals, the case, the symbols that matched her rifle. She didn't tell them everything. Not about the enhancements, not about what Nightshade really was. Some truths were too dangerous even here. "So you hold the key," Sarah said slowly. "That makes you a target and a bargaining chip." "No," Morgan said. "That makes me bait." The room went still. "You can't be serious," Torres said. "I don't have a choice," Morgan replied. "Volkov won't stop. If I run, he follows. If I hide, he digs. The only way to end this is to draw him out, on ground we choose." Harrison's voice rumbled from the corner. "That's suicide." Morgan looked at him, eyes hard. That's survival for all of us. The veterans exchanged glances. They weren't young anymore. They weren't special operators with the backing of governments. They were farmers, coaches, clerks, but they knew the truth when they heard it. Volkov wasn't just coming for Morgan. He was coming for their town, their families, their lives. One by one, they nodded, not because they believed in victory, but because they believed in standing together. That night, as Morgan returned to the ranch, she felt something shift inside her. For years, she had carried her battles alone, believing isolation was safety. But now, she wasn't alone. Others were willing to risk themselves beside her, and that terrified her more than facing Volkov. Because if they died, it would be on her. The ranch was dark when she arrived, too dark. She moved quietly, rifle ready, scanning for signs. The door was ajar, her heart clenched. She entered, every nerve on fire. "Grandma," she whispered. No answer. She moved room to room, breath held, the silence crushing. The living room light clicked on. Ruth sat in her chair, calm, hands folded in her lap. Across from her, a man in a black coat rose to his feet, tall, broad-shouldered, hair silver, eyes like ice. Viktor Volkov. The ghost of her grandfather's past, standing in her living room, alive, real, and smiling. Why was her grandmother so calm in the presence of a man who carried death in his very posture? Morgan froze in the doorway, rifle raised, body tense to fire. But Ruth's steady voice cut through the air before she could. "Put it down, child," the old woman said softly. "If he wanted us dead, we'd already be gone." Viktor Volkov smiled faintly, the expression cold, calculated, without warmth. "Wise woman," he said, his accent smooth as silk stretched thin over steel. "Your bloodline always did understand restraint." Every instinct screamed at Morgan to pull the trigger, but Volkov stood relaxed, hands visible, no weapon drawn. His confidence wasn't arrogance, it was certainty. He had planned this moment for decades. "Step away from her," Morgan ordered, voice flat. Volkov tilted his head, studying her. "So this is the granddaughter, Eagle-Eye's heir, the ghost they whispered about in the mountains." His eyes glinted. "I wondered if you were real. Now I see you are more than rumor." "Say what you came to say," Morgan snapped. Volkov took a slow step forward. She tightened her aim. He stopped, amused. "I came to offer you a choice." Ruth's eyes narrowed. "He never comes with choices, only chains." Volkov ignored her, gaze fixed on Morgan. "You are hunted, yes, by your own government, by enemies you cannot see. You are an experiment abandoned like all the others, but me, I offer you truth. The truth of what Nightshade was, the truth of what your grandfather stole, the truth of Prometheus." The name curled through the room like smoke. Morgan's grip tightened. "And what do you want in return?" His smile sharpened. "Partnership. Together we finish what your grandfather began. You carry the legacy in your veins, the conditioning, the precision, the mind to see what others cannot. You, Morgan, are Prometheus." Her pulse thudded, but she forced her face to stay neutral. He was trying to get inside her head, to name her what she feared most. "You think I'll help you," she said. "I know you will," Volkov replied calmly, "because the alternative is death, not just yours, your grandmother's, your town, everyone you dare to care about." His eyes flicked toward Ruth with deliberate cruelty. "You've hidden long enough. The world will not let you remain silent." The silence in the room was suffocating. Ruth sat perfectly still, eyes locked on her granddaughter, waiting to see her answer. Finally, Morgan lowered the rifle, but only slightly. "You think threats make me bend. You don't know me." Volkov's eyes glittered. "On the contrary, I know you better than you know yourself. You were shaped by my enemy, conditioned by his science. Every breath you take proves my work was not in vain." Something inside her cracked at those words. A memory slammed into her. Nightshade Training, 2012. The bunker's fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. the sterile smell of chemicals and oil. She sat with 10 others, eyes dilated from injections, muscles trembling from drills that broke lesser soldiers. Instructors in black coats watching, writing notes. "Focus, Reeves," they barked. "You don't feel fatigue, you don't miss, you don't hesitate." She remembered Chen vomiting in the corner after a dose, Diaz screaming in his sleep, William staring blankly at a wall, eyes hollow, and her own reflection, calm, detached, unbreaking. That wasn't natural. That wasn't just willpower. That was something they had done to her. Her voice cut through the memory, low and sharp. "You made us." Volkov nodded, pleased. "Duh, we planted the seeds. Your Americans only harvested them. You are proof of Prometheus, my proof. And now you will finish the design." Morgan steadied herself, fury burning in her chest, but her face stayed stone. "You're right about one thing," she said quietly. "I am proof." She raised the rifle again, sight square between his eyes. "But proof can also destroy." The room held its breath. Volkov didn't flinch. His confidence never wavered. He simply smiled as though he had expected this. "Not tonight," he said softly. He glanced at Ruth, then back at Morgan. "You will choose granddaughter of Eagle Eye, not because I force you, but because you cannot resist what you are. When you are ready, you will come to me." And then impossibly he turned his back, walked to the door, stepped into the night. Morgan followed, rifle aimed, heart hammering. But when she reached the porch, the yard was empty. No sound of engines, no crunch of boots, just silence, as though the night had swallowed him whole. She lowered the rifle, breath ragged. Ruth joined her, leaning on her cane. "You can't fight him alone," the old woman said gently. "I don't have a choice," Morgan whispered. "Yes, you do," Ruth said firmly. "You can fight him with others, or you can let him turn you into him. Don't let legacy be chains, let it be fire." Morgan stared into the darkness, Volkov's words echoing inside her. "You are Prometheus." She didn't know yet if it was a curse or a weapon, but one truth was undeniable. The past was no longer chasing her. It was standing on her porch, waiting for her answer. And if she didn't act soon, Eagle's Ridge would burn. Why were the power lines down in a town that never lost power? That was the first question spreading through Eagle's Ridge as dawn broke. Houses sat dark, refrigerators dead, streetlights lifeless. The utility company hadn't sent word, and the weather had been clear all week. But Morgan Reeves didn't need an explanation. She knew exactly what it meant. Volkov was tightening the noose. She drove into town at sunrise, her truck moving through uneasy silence. People gathered in small clusters, whispering about outages, about men they didn't recognize hanging around the motel, about strangers in suits flashing badges that didn't look right. Fear was a scent, and the whole town reeked of it. Carl Fisher waved her over outside the hardware store. His jaw was tight, eyes harder than usual. "Transformer outside town's fried. Not an accident. We found charges on the tower. Professional work." Morgan's stomach sank. "Sabotage." Carl nodded grimly. "They want us cut off. No lights, no phones, no backup." "Isolation," she muttered. "Standard prep for control." Inside the store, the veterans gathered again. The room felt heavier than before. The maps were still on the table, but now red circles had multiplied. Sightings, incidents, patterns. Torres jabbed a finger at the map. 3 locals reported break-ins last night. No valuables taken, just files, old military records. They're digging into our past. Sarah Parker added, "And the paper's office was hit. My archives are gone, clippings on veterans, old obits, family histories. Whoever they are, they're building dossiers." Harrison's voice rumbled low. "They're hunting weaknesses, connections, leverage." Morgan stood at the edge of the table, arms crossed, listening. The room quieted as they turned to her. She hadn't asked to lead, but the silence pressed her into it. "They're not looking for me anymore," she said. "They're looking through me. Everyone connected to me is now a target, which means you." Her words landed like a stone in water, rippling through the room. No one flinched. No one backed away. They had lived through too much to turn now. Tors leaned forward, then we hit back. Morgan shook her head. Not yet. Volkov wants me desperate. Wants me to move before I'm ready. If we fight on his terms, we lose. Sarah's sharp eyes narrowed. And if we wait too long? Morgan didn't answer, because waiting had already cost them. That evening, the first casualty came. Michael, the ranch hand who had helped Morgan mend fences for years, didn't show up for supper. His truck was found abandoned by the river, driver's side door open, keys still in the ignition. No blood, no body, just absence. Ruth's hands trembled as she folded Michael's jacket, left behind in the barn. He was family, she whispered. Morgan clenched her jaw, fury boiling under her skin. This wasn't random pressure. This was targeted, a message. You're not untouchable. We can take anyone you care about. She sat alone that night, the Macmillan laid across her lap, staring at the stars. Her mind spiraled back to Nightshade again, back to the faces of those she had lost, one by one as the program collapsed. Diaz, Chen, Williams, ghosts she carried, ghosts Volkov had created. The rage rose like fire, but underneath it was something colder, guilt. Every person taken, every life endangered felt like it traced back to her blood, to her silence. The next morning, she made her move. The veterans gathered at Tor's barn again, but this time Morgan didn't wait for questions. She unrolled a topographic map of the ridge, marked with ridgelines, choke points, elevation data. We can't outgun him, she began. But we can outthink him. This is our ground. We know every trail, every ridge, every creek. Volkov's men rely on surveillance and intimidation. We strip that away, we level the field. Carl frowned. You're talking guerrilla. Yes, Morgan said. Small teams, silent disruption, hit their supplies, disable their comms, bleed them without showing our full hand. Sarah crossed her arms. And what about the CIA? They'll be watching too. Morgan's eyes hardened. Then let them watch. If they wanted me safe, they'd have acted already. They're waiting to see who wins, so we fight for ourselves. A heavy silence fell. Then Tors broke it with a sharp nod. Then we fight. That night, the first operation began. Morgan moved with Carl and Tors along the ridgeline, moonlight spilling silver across the pines. They wore no night vision, no high-tech gear, just rifles, knives, and the silence of men and women who had lived in shadows before. At the valley floor, Volkov's men had set up a forward camp. Generators hummed. Radios crackled. Guards smoked by the trucks, unaware of the eyes watching from above. Morgan's breath slowed. She signaled with 2 fingers. Tors moved left, Carl right, silent as the wind. Within minutes the camp fell into chaos. Fuel lines sliced, radios smashed, tires punctured. Not a shot fired, not a body dropped, just confusion. Morgan's team melted back into the ridge as the Russians cursed and scrambled. By dawn, Volkov's men were still stranded, equipment crippled. A small victory, but a necessary one. Back at the ranch, Ruth waited. Her eyes softened when she saw her granddaughter return alive, but she said nothing. She knew this was only the beginning. That afternoon, another message came. A package left at the ranch gate, no return address. Inside, Michael's dog tags, stained, bent. Ruth's hands shook as she held them. Morgan's chest clenched with grief and rage. Volkov was done probing. Now he was punishing. That night, Morgan stood by the fire, staring into the flames. The veterans waited around her, silent, watching. She lifted the tags, clenched them in her fist. This ends, she said, her voice steady but heavy with fire. No more waiting, no more hiding. We bring the fight to him on our terms, one way or another. The firelight flickered across their faces, eyes hard, jaws set. They weren't soldiers anymore. They were protectors, defenders, and they had chosen their ground. Morgan Reeves, The woman who had tried to disappear was no longer hiding. And somewhere in the shadows, Viktor Volkov smiled, because this was exactly what he had wanted all along. Why did the air feel different that morning? Too still, too heavy, as if the mountains themselves were holding their breath. Morgan Reeves woke before dawn, heart already steady, body already moving. She strapped on her gear with the efficiency of muscle memory. Rifle, sidearm, blade, spare mags. Ruth watched from the kitchen, eyes lined with both fear and pride. "You don't have to do this alone," Ruth said softly. Morgan paused, then met her gaze. "I was never meant to do it alone." The veterans were waiting. Tors, Carl, Sarah, Harrison, faces carved by age but lit by the same fire they once carried in war. They weren't here for glory. They weren't here for orders. They were here because their home was under siege, and because Morgan had become the unspoken center of their resistance. On the ridge, the first movement came. Black SUVs rolled in from the north, tactical trucks from the south. Volkov was done hiding. His men fanned out, methodical, trained. Drones buzzed overhead. Radios crackled. A full cordon closing in on Eagle's Ridge. "Numbers," Tors whispered, scanning through binoculars. "Too many," Sarah muttered. "Doesn't matter," Morgan said. Her voice was calm, but inside her chest a storm raged. This was it. No more shadows, no more whispers. The war her grandfather had left unfinished had finally reached her doorstep. She lay prone, the Macmillan snug against her shoulder, eye locked to the scope. The wind whispered across the valley, tugging at her hair, but her breath slowed. Her world narrowed to the reticle, the rhythm of her heartbeat, the moment before release. The first shot cracked. A Russian spotter dropped, comms antenna clattering beside him. Confusion rippled through the line. Before they regrouped, Tors fired from the left ridge, Carl from the right. The trap was sprung. The veterans moved like ghosts through the terrain they knew best. Hit, fade, vanish. Cut supply lines, sabotage vehicles, scatter the assault. They weren't soldiers anymore, but they didn't need to be. They were defenders of their own soil, and that gave them a strength Volkov's men could never replicate. But numbers had weight, and Volkov had brought many. By mid-morning, the town itself was under fire. Windows shattered, cars burned. Locals huddled in basements while the veterans fought street to street. The smell of smoke choked the air. Morgan moved with ruthless precision, her rifle finding targets at impossible ranges. Every shot slowed the advance. Every shot bought time. But for every man she dropped, two more pushed forward. She knew this wasn't just battle, it was theater. Volkov wanted her to bleed, to exhaust herself, to reveal where the journals, where the case, where Prometheus lay hidden. And then she saw him. Viktor Volkov stood in the town square, calm amidst the chaos, flanked by armored men. His silver hair gleamed in the smoke, his voice carried through a loudspeaker. "Morgan Reeves," he called, "daughter of Nightshade, granddaughter of Eagle Eye, you fight for ghosts while your people suffer. End this charade. Come to me and they live. Refuse and this town burns." The words knifed through her. She scanned the faces of her people, neighbors, friends, the innocent caught in a war they didn't choose. Fear etched into their eyes. Harrison's hand landed on her shoulder. "He's baiting you," he growled. "I know," Morgan said. "Then don't." But she was already moving. Through alleys, across broken fences, slipping like smoke through her own town. The rifle was steady in her hands, but inside her chest the weight was crushing. Every choice she'd made had led here. Every silence, every secret. She emerged into the square, rifle aimed, voice cutting through the chaos. "Volkov." The crowd hushed. His men froze. Volkov turned, smiling as though he'd been expecting her all along. "So," he said softly, arms outstretched, "Prometheus finally walks into the light." She aimed dead center. "This ends now." Volkov chuckled. "No, this only begins. You cannot kill me without killing yourself. You are my work. Every instinct, every impossible shot, every ghost you've left behind, they are me. Pull that trigger and you admit you are nothing but my creation." The words struck like a hammer, but Morgan didn't flinch. Her finger rested steady on the trigger. Behind her, she felt the veterans closing in, their presence a wall of resolve. She wasn't alone. She never had been, even when she believed it. Her voice was low, steady, carrying the weight of her choice. "You're wrong. I'm not your creation. I'm my grandmother's blood, my grandfather's fire, my own scars, my own silence. You don't own that. You never did." Volkov's smile faltered, just for a moment. That was all she needed. The rifle cracked, his body jerked. Silence swallowed the square, his men faltered, stunned, leaderless. The veterans pressed the advantage, sweeping the rest of Volkov's forces back into the valley. The town held. The ridge stood. When the smoke cleared, Morgan lowered her rifle, hands trembling now that it was over. She stood in the square, breathing hard, the eyes of her town on her, not with mockery, not with suspicion, with respect, with understanding. Ruth stepped forward, cane steady, eyes wet but proud. She reached up, touched her granddaughter's face, and whispered, "You chose fire." Morgan closed her eyes, letting the words sink into her bones. Later, as the fires burned low and the veterans tended to the wounded, she sat alone on the ridge, rifle laid across her knees. The mountain stretched silent before her, vast and eternal. Her mind was quiet for the first time in years, not because the ghosts were gone, but because she understood them now. They weren't chains. They were reminders, reminders of survival, of sacrifice, of dignity that needed no words. The narrator's voice would lower here, soft and reflective, as if speaking to the soul. Sometimes strength isn't about shouting the loudest. Sometimes it's about standing when no one believes you can. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And in the quiet of Eagle's Ridge, the granddaughter of Eagle Eye finally laid her ghosts to rest.